Greetings and welcome to this Rastafari Reasoning with Ras Sekou Tafari today as part of the Rastafari Reasonings on Africa and Historical Perspective research project at the University of Vienna Department of African Studies. We welcome you all very warmly to this reasoning with Ras Sekou Tafari. Especially, we of course welcome Ras Sekou Tafari, who has joined us today for this very interesting reasoning. Ras Sekou is the co-founder and publisher of the famous and historic Rastafari Speaks newspaper, and is also the CEO of Frontline publications, the biggest publisher of Rastafari publications worldwide. And we are very happy to have you today on this Rastafari Reasoning. Welcome, Ras Sekou.
Give thanks for being here. Give thanks, Ras Dominik.
Blessed Lord. And since this is a Rastafari Reasoning, and we also want to include the participants and give some insights into Rastafari reasonings. Already since the 1970s, Rastafari scholar Carol Yorney, for example, has described Rastafari reasonings as a sacred dialogue. She said the occasion or the nature of the occasion being holy, as we also do in so sacro reasonings and events. Ras Sekou, could you start us off with a prayer for this occasion today?
Yes. I want to give thanks to their Majesties, Haile Selassie I, Empress Menen Aswa, and we give thanks to I, the terrain of Rastafari. We give thanks to the great ancestral spirits and our spirit guides. We give thanks for great ancestors Bongo Watu, Bongo Time, Bongo Shamans. We give thanks to the priest, High Priest Emmanuel. We give thanks for Sam Brown, Eichel Tafari. We give thanks for Isa J, Sister Ijania, Sister Cyril, Margaret, Sister Margaret, Bongo Ira, Bongo Historian, Rasta Historian, and all the great Rastafari elders and brethren and sisters who have passed before us and whose backs we stand on. And we give thanks for the spirit of truth, the spirit of love, the spirit of abundance, the spirit of relativity. We give thanks to all the great ancestors who are here with us and who we share. Rongo, Rocky, Mama Baby I, we give thanks. We give thanks for the spirit of truth, the spirit of love, and the spirit of abundance. We give thanks that this day, this reasoning will be fulfilling to all as we go forward. In no other name but the name of their Majesty, Haile Selassie I, and Empress Menen Aswa, and I, the terrain of Rastafari. Yes, I give thanks.
Yes, I give thanks, Ras Sekou. As I just mentioned, Ras Sekou, you are the co-founder and publisher of Rastafari Speaks newspaper, the CEO of Frontline distribution, biggest publisher of Rastafari publications. You are also a partner in our Rastafari Reasonings on Africa and Historical Perspectives project at the University of Vienna. We are very happy and honored to have you as a partner of our project. And we are both members of the School of Sacrament Rastafari University, So Sacro, International Rastafari Studies Research Platform. And so I would like to start this reasoning with asking you, having been involved in Rastafari educational activities, as I just counted it from Rastafari Speaks up to basically School of Sacrament Rastafari University, why has that been so important for you, and to get involved in Rastafari educational educational aspects and educational endeavors? And maybe you can also go a bit into your biographical history, but I will also share right now in the chat the last reasoning we had with you on the Sosakro platform, where you shared a lot about your biographical background, and so that people can also look that up, and we can also build already today on that record of your biographical background. But in general, speaking of your educational endeavors and why this has been important to you over the years, maybe you can also touch on some biographical points there as well.
Well,
Give thanks.
give thanks for being here in this important reasoning. My interest in education stems from growing up in a home whereby it was important for us to read. It was important for us to be informed before speaking about something. So education is a tool, as far as I am concerned, that is used for our people. And I say our people, I say Rastafari people, I say African people, I say down-pressed people, is a tool that is used to elevate one's standard, to open up one's mind in terms of understanding the other people, culture, and to see and know how people live. And therefore, we use education from that perspective. I myself trained in social science originally, foundation background in social science, international relations, international studies, and labor relations, what people may know as industrial relations. That was my original. Then in that, I was able to move forward into accounting, law, economics, etc. So I'm coming from a perspective of knowledge, of knowing, and you only could know when you study and when you implement it. You know, it's all well and good to have knowledge from a book, but it goes beyond the book, because we have to be able to put it into practice. And that is where the best of education comes in. I see myself basically as someone who loves the idea of mentoring, because sometimes you are a mentor, but you don't even realize that somebody you might be mentoring, they're looking at you as a mentor, but you don't even realize what you're doing as a person in the world, that they're looking to you or looking up to you because of how you live and the standards that you have set. So education is that tool that we use to lift out our people out of poverty, out of ignorance, and therefore prepare us so we could know more about our past, our present, and as we look forward to the future. That is education in a nutshell. And therefore, I think it's important that education be applied, especially when you look in terms of how we can use it to mentor younger people and those who come in the future. There had a time when in Rastafari, when going to colleges or university was looked down on. And I understand why our elders like Bongo Watu and the priest, high priest, Emmanuel, and so on, and Sam Brown, many others who saw education. Not they had a problem with education, but they had a problem with the colonial education, because when we go to these schools, we come out with our slave master degree and our doctorate degrees and all the other degrees. But at the end of the day, we believe that all that so-called degrees, we can use that to tell someone what they can do. But at the end of the day, what makes education is important is when we can apply it to the masses of people, or when we can apply it to lift their levels and standards out from where they were, so they could know and they could break down and rebel against colonialism and neocolonialism. That is what education is supposed to do, even in the faculties of universities, is to reconstruct a whole new concept of education, because the old education taught us many things that were still about backwardness in terms of how we look at our people. When we look at education, education must be that yardstick which we must use to lift our people out of poverty and ignorance. Give thanks.
Give thanks, Ras Sekou. Speaking about education, in the last webinar with Sosakru, you explained that you actually cite Rastafari in Trinidad. You are from Trinidad, around 1974. And then in Grenada, you had this idea of Rastafari Speaks in around 1979, and then around for the the golden jubilee of His Majesty and Empress Menen coronation, that the first issue of Rastafari Speaks came out in November of 1980. So that was one of the first Rastafari newspaper publications, especially outside of Jamaica. What was your approach to that when you started Rastafari Speaks? What did you want to do with it, or what you found important that it fills a certain void or a certain gap, or what was the motivation, and also the way how you did Rastafari Speaks at that time, what topics you addressed and what you found important within the Rastafari nation and beyond?
Well, the idea for Rastafari Speaks started germinated even before going to Grenada in 1979. In March 1979, we started germinated basically around Trinidad, because when I looked at what was taking place in our communities and how the newspapers, the Trinidad Express, the Guardian, etc., the kind of propaganda war that was taking place against Rastafari people or dreadlocks people on a whole, you will see all kind of backward statements. For instance, someone committed a robbery, and you will see in the papers, headline on the front page, man with a Rasta hairstyle was caught for committing a robbery. 9 out of 10 times, these people were not Rastafari, was not practicing Rastafari. Sometimes some of these people were using things like mop heads and so on, and to go and camouflage to commit crimes. But the media was not concerned about that. The bourgeois media never concerned about investigating properly. So in fact, they was giving the Rastafari community a bad name. So when I went into Grenada to serve with Maurice Bishop in terms of helping in the Grenada Revolution at that time, March 1979, it was basically, I was at Camp Blunt in St. George's, just adjacent to the Grenada market in St. George's. I happened to be in the companionship of a whole lot of Rastafari brethren who were there giving their service at Camp Blunt, as myself, to the nation and to the cause of the Grenada Revolution. Nonetheless, there were negative things, although the Rastafari community had stood behind the New Jewel movement and the revolution, the democratic revolution in Grenada. There were negative things that was coming back in terms of people who were looking at terms of the cannabis smoking and so on. And although the New Jewel movement and the People Revolutionary Government was not really making the problem of ganja a problem, but people was thinking that Rastafari or some of the Rastafari brethren, they were making the whole concept of ganja be a priority when it was not a problem within the community, because no one was arresting people for smoking cannabis at that time. There was none. But some of the major people at the time who was called out and who came out to support the Green Revolution on the night of the revolution, we had Prince Nanan and many others, Rastafari brethren and sisters, who came out and supported the Green Revolution and helped initiate it. And at the end of the day, because they didn't have any media, they didn't have any voice to speak for them, the media, the Torchlight newspaper at the time, which was a bourgeois newspaper that was being used previously by Eric Gary, who was the former prime minister then, they used that to kind of attack the Green Revolution using Rastafari and throwing up negative aspects that it may feel that would link Rastafari with the People's Revolutionary government and with the revolution that was taking place. So all these was what made me be more conscious and start speaking to my brethren, Kimani Langa. We were doing a magazine at the time, a cultural magazine. He was editing, he was a publisher, and we were doing this magazine called Kambule, which was a cultural magazine that we were doing highlights from throughout the Caribbean on different events and things and people. And so from there, after talking to people like Kimani Langa, Shango Baku, and others, Rastafari, I knew that it was very important. So I already had coined the term Rastafari Speaks, and just wanted a body of people who with like minds, who could come together to put this together as a force. There were other newspapers, yes. For instance, like brethren in St. Lucia and Antigua, they were doing little newspaper, what do they call, copies, but not in a full news-fledged. That's how Rastafari came. When Rastafari Speaks came, it came with a difference. It came with a standard, because we believe that certain standards, because if we believe in Haile Selassie the First, if we believe in Rastafari and Haile Selassie to be our teacher, we have to set standards. And we know the importance of newspaper. We know from the importance of propaganda. Studied Marcus Garvey, and Marcus Garvey himself had many newspapers, including the La Nation, the Nation newspaper. He had the Black Man newspaper and so on. And these were very vital in terms of being able to contract the whole concept of whatever propaganda is taking place against what is taking place against the Rastafari community. So Rastafari Speaks came on the scene with that in mind.
Give thanks. And from that long experience working in Rastafari education in a way, educating also Rastafari about what is happening in other parts of the Caribbean, other parts of the world, other parts of Africa, and also educating the wider society about Rastafari. From that experience now, bringing that into, for example, the School of Sacrament, Rastafari University, or also being a partner of this university research project, Rastafari Reasonings project at the University of Vienna, Austria. What is, from that experience, what recommendation do you give on the one hand to Rastafari educational educational enterprises, and on the other hand also on more and more Rastafari research that comes up by universities, by different university research projects? There are nowadays many publications on Rastafari. Back then in the late 1970s, there were very few, and newspapers like Rastafari Speaks was actually one of the few sources of information about Rastafari, written sources. From that experience, what would you recommend, or what would you like to see on the one hand by Rastafari educational initiatives, and on the other hand by universities or outside scholars and authors writing on Rastafari? Also from your experience with Frontline distributions, you know many publications on Rastafari. What you have seen so far, what would you recommend?
Well,
Give thanks.
I would think that it's very important how research is conducted, how we investigate research. And that is mean to say how we implement the methods in terms of how we conduct that research. You know, you know for a fact that in the late 70s, early 80s, those who were writing mainly about Rastafari were and being published were mainly people who were not Rastafari. Some of them were mainly white people, yes. For instance, you had Barrett and you had Owens and so on. They were the ones before that. Back in the 40s, you had a brother from I think he was from Ohio University. I think it was Simmons. But he, you know, so you had all this basic research was being done by non-Rastafari people. It was not until somewhere in the early 60s, you had Black people when it was suggested that the whole event around Rastafari and the negative events, that you had people at the University of West Indies who now started to do research around Rastafari. So in my mind, I think that the way we conduct within Rastafari people, the method we use, not only using orthodox method, but also using non-orthodox method example, but that must be fulfilling and must be used in a scientific manner to qualify and quantify the research. And I'll give an example. For instance, when one researching, one could just look in terms of what might be written, and one might say, yes, this might be something valid, but we may have more research that can be done in terms of oral tradition, which can be verified. But it just taking what a person might say from 50 years ago, who are around the camps, or 60 years, 70 years ago, who were around the camps around Jamaica, but also to be able to qualify it by having valid information from people who were actually there firsthand, and so we can validate that and say this is also valid information, the oral tradition of the research, and that is very important, especially in Rastafari. Yes.
Give thanks. And now when it comes to university projects on Rastafari publications, especially by outside scholars, for example, for our summer schools in SOSACRO, School of Sacrament Rastafari University, a text, for example, that we used for young students interested in Rastafari was Ras Jalani's sensitive scholarship article. Ras Jalani, one of the conveners of SOSACRO, of course, where he speaks about sensitive scholarship when people come to learn about Rastafari. How would you see that? What do you see as respectful scholarship? What would you like to see when people, especially outside scholars, come? How would you like to see Rastafari, people learn about Rastafari, and then also Rastafari presented?
Well, first and foremost, one must have if you're going to come in to investigate Rastafari, you must have the humility to come into the Rastafari community and investigate and be part for that minute of what is happening in the community, and not go mainly by hearsay. Because a lot of times in the early days, a lot of the brethren and sisters who were writing non-Rastafari, they were scared to come into the community, and they would get their so-called first-hand information from what was being told to them or what they read in the newspaper. And a lot of times the people who were writing in these newspapers had biasness against Rastafari, because remember, Rastafari came as a philosophy, as a liberty that was not in sync with the colonial system. It was not in sync with neocolonialism and so on, and capitalism and so on. So it comes as a new formation, you know, and therefore, if you're going to do research, you need to be able to sit down and reason with the brethren, and not just quote, not just come up with your own concept in terms of how you think about it, but listen to what the brethren say. And brethren and sisters have different viewpoints, because that is the whole thing within Rastafari. There are different perspectives, but there's one thread that holds Rastafari together, and that is the love and the divinity of the High Majesty. So when a lot of those who were writing and researching, they were seeing that Rastafari was a cult. Rastafari is not a cult. Rastafari is a way of life. It's a way of life emerging every day, right? Today, Rastafari being over 80-something, 90 years old, but we have achieved more in that 80 or 90, 90-something years. We have achieved more than we would say that Hinduism, which is a way of life as well, over the last 5,000 plus years. Because what we have achieved in 90 plus years is great. Is a great achievement in terms of being able to still going through the process of codifying and outlining the writ of Rastafari from you know, in the different stages and different formations.
Give thanks. So you say central is to listen to Rastafari themselves, and to ground actually with Rastafari, to learn from Rastafari themselves. So this is also, you know, what I learned at the School of Sacrament, and also the approach therefore of our reasoning project, Rastafari Reasonings project at the University of Vienna, and also initiatives like having reasonings with the eye and many reasonings that we also had throughout So Sacro and beyond. But so when it comes to listening to Rastafari themselves in academia, this is also connected to this important new approach that is coming up about decolonizing academic knowledge production, which is now a very important, basically even a movement within academia. And in the last webinar with So Sacro, you said the Rastafari Speaks newspaper was so important because, and I quote, you said, we need our own voice to be heard. So in that context of decolonizing academic knowledge production on the one side, but in general, decolonizing knowledge production, how it is done nowadays, especially in the Western world through media and so on. How do you see that contribution of how can Rastafari contribute to that, especially decolonizing the knowledge production about Rastafari, but in general with all topics that somehow concern and affect Rastafari? And do you see it as important, decolonizing academic knowledge production or knowledge in general?
I think it's very vital. It's very vital, especially we now have so many researchers, so many scholars, grassroots scholars and academic scholars within the whole academia world. And so it's very important that if you're going to look in terms of how you decolonize academia, how you decolonize what is taking place, it means to say that not only in terms of the relevance of what the grassroots has to say, not only in terms of the relevance of what coming from the bottom, from the groundation level, whereby the ones who are still making contribution to our humanity, how you look at that. So you're not like you brushed a person off because they did not go and have a PhD or a master's or whatever. But you look at in terms of what they are contributing to society, right? You look at what, for instance, when Walter Rodney, as an academic, progressive academic that is, was teaching at Mona campus in Jamaica, he took time off to go among the grassroots, mostly Rastafari people, women and men, to liaise with them, to teach history, African history, so they can know more about who they are as a people, right? But the relevance of decolonizing academia comes because what comes out of academic and the academia is very important, because we so much the outside world, the masses, we listen to what the academics have to say. So at the end of the day, you want to make sure that whatever comes out must be poignant and relevant to the people, to elevate the people. It must not be one whereby how they see Rastafari or any other ideology or culture in a negative perspective. For instance, when we look at how we write about what is written about African people who came to the West as slaves or prisoners of war because they were captured, how you look at that history and who writes about the history, right? When you look at who writes about the history and then how the history is tinted. So no one looks in terms of the rebellion that was taking place in the plantation. Nobody looks in terms of that rebellion is what would have caused some of these rebellions over time, whether it was in Jamaica, whether it was in Guyana, whether it was in Trinidad, whether it was in Antigua and St. Lucia, North America, Brazil, etc. Some of these rebellions is what forced some of these the slave master to come to the table to negotiate. For instance, in England, and when you look at England compared to their role in the British Caribbean, they were forced because of the continuous rebellion by slave plantation by the Maroons in Jamaica and among other Caribbean islands in Trinidad, Daga, and so on in Guyana. You had Kojo and you had going on in places like Suriname, Dutch Guyana. You had what you call the Cimarrones. So you had all this taking place. You had in what we'll call Brazil. You had slave rebellion. So we do not apply that. We just look at yes, slavery was abolished and so on. But we do not look in terms of the part and the role and the progressive role and played by those who were the creators, who were the creators of the slave trade, and those who became slaves or who were captured and brought here as prisoners of war to these parts of the world. So the same thing in terms of Rastafari. We look at the Rastafari, but we do not look at those who became the victims. We look in terms of why Rastafari came into existence. Why Rastafari came into existence in this dispensation. It came into existence as a rebellious form to oppose, right, colonialism. That is why Rastafari was attacked in the way it was attacked. That is why Lennon Howell was attacked in the way he was attacked. That's why he went to prison. That's why he was put in a mental asylum, because of how he looked at how he took Rastafari came and to say we no longer want to worship and serve King George V, but we want to serve and hold on to the Black King, who was now crowned and coronated in 1930. Here it is. Here comes Haile Selassie I and Empress Menen, the Alpha and the Omega. And that is where we must look from that perspective, the perspective of breaking down colonialism and now neocolonialism. And then that same thing must also take place and be advanced in the institution of learning, no matter where. Whether it's Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, University of Vienna, wherever, even amongst us in Ras Sekou, that has to be, that struggle must take place within the ambits of I&I, just to make sure that the struggle, and those who struggle and build, they must be raised to the level to understand that this is Rastafari came to break down neo-colonialism. It came to break down colonialism. And that is why up to today, those who brought the slaves, the British who was responsible for slavery in the Caribbean, the kings and the queen, they are still not coming forward to say that we are going to pay reparation for the deeds and the wrongfulness that they have done to the African people coming to the Caribbean, bringing them to North America, etc., etc. Give thanks.
Give thanks, Ras Sekou. I see the raised hands. We will have a question session at the end. We would like first to cover some of the general ground, and then we can come into a reasoning exchange with also more participants towards the end of the reasoning. In Ras Sekou, in the last reasoning with Sosakro, you said that you are the publisher of the Wise Mind, as you are one of the you are the biggest publisher of Rastafari publications. That is now very widespread, the Wise Mind of His Majesty, and but there is also the similar collection, Members of a New Race, published by Aister J. Manning, Rastafari himself. And in the last reasoning, you said you actually prefer the Members of a New Race compilation because I'm quoting, you said, as a Rastafari himself, Ras Junior Manning knew or knows what's more pointed for I and I. So in your work and also in the Rastafari Speaks, and I have here one of the it was the third series in the 2000. It is from 2003. It was my first order from Frontline publications in 2003, and you sent me also this Rastafari Speaks issue. It was my first Rastafari Speaks and my first experience of reading Rastafari Speaks. And so here I think we can see where, again, this example where you said, a Rasta knows what is pointed towards Rastafari. For example, you started with the teachings of His Majesty, and so on. Maybe you can quickly also speak on this, maybe also on the Wise Mind, as you in the last reasoning explained that you actually came up with that title, the Wise Mind of His Majesty, which is a compilation by Prince Ermias Haile Selassie, the president of the Ethiopian Crown Council, of quotations of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I, and that you actually came up with the title Wise Mind, but that you find also the Members of a New Race compilation important because it was compiled by a Rastafari himself. And maybe you can speak also on how that influenced what you published actually in the Rastafari Speaks newspaper, for example, starting with the teachings of His Majesty, and then you also have in there teachings by Marcus Garvey, which have greatly influenced me from when I read that in 2003. Very practical advice from Marcus Garvey's the course on African philosophy about how to read, how to study, and so on. That is what you put in there as a Rastaman yourself.
Yes, well, first and foremost, we want to say that knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. And that is how we can go forward with the importance of knowing that what knowledge can change the course of life, the course of things, the course of a people. So therefore, we look at knowledge, and when we look at the Wise Mind, the Prince Umayas, we had started having dialogue right around the time when we were about to publish My Life in Ethiopia Progress, Volume 1 and Volume 2. And they had reached out to us, and from there on, we continue to have dialogue with one of his economic advisor, who, over time we became very more closer, David Steinman. But the whole idea, they came and asked me if they could publish, we could publish for them. I think it was like quotations of Haile Selassie, etc. But we changed the name because we knew for a fact, as a Rastaman, I knew that the ones who would more embellish or want to and cherish the words of His Majesty Haile Selassie I would be Rastafari people. And therefore, I saw the importance of using the wise mind of His Majesty. So when I look at it, it was something when you look at Kwame Nkrumah have axioms of Nkrumah. You have the Red Book, Mao Zedong quotations and Mao Zedong thought. So I said to myself, we must have something very poignant, something very much strong for the High Majesty, whereby our youth, our elders, we can walk with this in our pockets and as a weapon of defense for, when we are attacked. It could help us every day, to lift us up every day, in terms of keeping us on a track of stability and how to overstand humanity and society. So hence the reason we said, let's do it, the wise mind of Haile Selassie I. And that is how it came out. And that was 2004. The first issue came out. And it had a ring all over the Rastafari world, and among even non-Rastafari youth started to read it. Our elders sat in Jamaica and decided at the time that this book must now be read by every Rastafari brethren, sister. They must possess one, because it gives us as a tool to be able to conquer. And when we are attacked, because the High Majesty speaks on character, he speaks on education, he speaks on leadership, he speaks on a variety of things that is important for us as a people, how we go about our life as a nation of people. So that in itself was the key. And then later on, about 4 or 5 years ago, since Chronix came into on the music scene, he did a song about Rastafari, about the using the wise mind, and he did give us the permission to use that song, to quote from it, and to use it for promotion and to advertise, and therefore it became more and more stronger, and still going stronger, because we plan to over time to translate it into Spanish, into French, into Swahili, etc. For the 20th anniversary. Next year will be the 20th anniversary, 2024. So we plan next year to make it a big anniversary celebration by having it in the language of Swahili, especially that Swahili goes over 14 African countries, and there's a great amount of Rastafari brethren all across East Africa and all across Africa as a whole. So that's one of the things we want to do coming forward, and to reduce the price for those markets, so they could be able to lap it up, because we think that this must be a tool that once as Rastafari people must be able to use at their possession to counteract whatever is coming at us, in this Armageddon. And of course, the Armageddon is getting steeper and steeper. When you look at Junior Manning, my brethren, Junior Manning, Isa J, he was in New York City, and he called me, and he said to me, he was doing the book, and I don't know if he felt at all he wasn't going to be around for too much longer, but he had put this collection together while he was in Malawi. And I think it was he and Ibo Cooper, and they all put it together. And it was a good and strong collection of some of the writings coming out from somewhere around 1956, 57, 58. They are about speeches by Their Majesty. So he put together these speeches and pulled them together and put them in this collection, which he called Members of a New Race. Very important, especially now, for us. And Their Majesty give us a charge in terms of, what the members of a new race need to be. And we all stand at Their Majesty mercy in terms of saying, yes, we are the members of a new race within Rastafari. And therefore, we took charge, and therefore we decided that thought that this will be very important piece for our people, the nation of Rastafari, to read. And not only Rastafari youth, African youths overall, young press people overall, so they could understand what is our call as we go forward, as we develop a new humanity. So when you look at overall the Rastafari Speaks newspaper, the one you got in 1993, you see it. Yes, we quoted Haile Selassie very much because Haile Selassie is Rastafari. Haile Selassie is Rastafari. Marcus Garvey, we have a whole page. You always had a page about Marcus Garvey. I thought it was very important that we kept up the words of Marcus Garvey, because Marcus Garvey, though he had run in the conflict and contradiction in terms of Their Majesty and Rastafari, but he also opened up a lot of people's minds. As some people would have said, he might have been a forerunner, right? But so we also, since then, have taken what we call the message to the people, or what we'll call that last course that Garvey taught in 1937 in Canada. We took it and I edited into a new collection, which we made more poignant for the masses of African people, and we called it now Lessons for African People, the Course of African Philosophy, as taught by Garvey, Marcus Garvey, Professor Marcus Garvey, in 1937. So this is in a nutshell when Garvey called together all his best students in 1937 in what we know as Nova Scotia, in Canada, after he was banned. 10 years after he was deported. 10 years before that, he was deported to Jamaica in 1927 after being railroaded for fake charges of fraud, newspaper fraud. So 1937, he decided to come together and bring together the best of his cadres, the best of his students, the best of his representatives who were now running different chapters of UNIA, and he brought them together. And this, he thought, was a very important way of being able to bring them together and teach them all that he knew, so they could be equipped to build what he called in 1914 the Universal Negro Improvement Association and the African Community League, the ACL. And we stand strongly in terms of Marcus Garvey is a strong example for us as African people, a great organizer of people, a great, who knew the importance of the propaganda machinery, the propaganda war. And you know what, you tell a lie 1,000 times, it becomes the truth at some point in time in the people who are hearing it. So he knew the importance of propaganda, hence the reason why he set up the newspapers and so on. And if Marcus Garvey were able to bring together between 7 and 10 plus million people in the 20s, when there were no internet, you can imagine what he can do now. And what we, as students of Marcus Garvey, students of Haile Selassie, when Haile Selassie saw the importance of setting up the Buhani Press, one of the first things he did after being coronated by mid-1930s. So so when you look at it, that is the standard we have, and right why we feel so strongly about media. That is why we feel so strongly about propaganda and educating our people. And education use the media as a form of an educational institution to educate our people, Rastafari and non-Rastafari, down-pressed people, African people, etc. Give thanks.
Give thanks, Ras Sekou. And yes, after reading in your Rastafari Speaks 2003 issue of Marcus Garvey, the chapter from the course of African philosophy, by now I of course have the book published by Frontline distributions, and we of course also encourage everybody to check out the website of Frontline distributions and order this book, The Wise Mind of His Majesty, also The Members of a New Race, and you will, as many of you already know, see that there is so many publications that actually Frontline has made possible for us to have available. In 1997, Ras Sekou, you acquired the copyright for the autobiography of His Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I, and in the last Sosakro reasoning, you said that it was important to have it within the arsenal of Rastafari. This is very similar to what you said now. Knowledge is power, but as you have also now emphasized in a specific way, even to Rastafari is attacked on many levels often. So this knowledge is when you say to have His Majesty autobiography as in our arsenal, it means also for defensive purposes. Did I understand that correctly?
Totally correct.
And
yes. Yeah. So yes, because a lot of times we as Rastafari people, when you go to Rastafari people, we still hold on to the Bible, and the Bible, it might has its importance because the Majesty say He dwell in the Bible. But however, we as Rastafari people, sons and daughters in the Caribbean, sons and daughters of the Tainos, we are the ones who came here as brought here by force, our people. So here it is. If we say we are now following Their Majesty Haile Selassie the First and Empress Menen asked for, we need to know more about who Haile Selassie is. We need to know more about Haile Selassie more than we know about Solomon. We need to know more about Haile Selassie more than we know about Job. We need to know more about Haile Selassie more than we know about Peter and Paul, because his life is there as a standard for us as a people. We know the elect verses of Their Majesty selected verses. Is there as a standard for us to learn how he dealt with politics or politics, how he dealt with meeting different leaders, how he dealt with education, how he dealt with the military, how he dealt with organization, how he looked into the importance of agriculture, and all these things. We look in terms of how he grew up, his life, his father, Ras McConnell. We have to look at all these aspects. We cannot find that in the Bible. We have to find it in his autobiography. So who is best to keep that as as Mama Waleti may say, we don't deal with libraries anymore because it's not lies. We're dealing with a true berry. So how do we keep these things in our true berry? This documentation that is important for us as a people to read. So yes, it was very vital that we got autobiography volume 1, My Life and Ethiopia Progress, in our arsenal, and also to get from previously Oxford Press and then Michigan State University. It is important that we got those as those very important texts within the ambits of Rastafari, because it's important for us to use them as our weapon. We need to know who our father is. We need to know how his history, how he came, his tactics and strategy in terms of his whole lifestyle and his whole upbringing and so on. And how could we know that if we don't read the autobiography of Haile Selassie I? Every Rasta man and Rasta woman and every African should read the autobiography of Haile Selassie I, and also the volume 1 and volume 2, because the volume 2 show you about the treacherousness of the Europeans and against Haile Selassie when Italy attacked Ethiopia in 1937. So it's very important that we come to grips and understand that knowledge is power. Hail
Yes, give thanks. And give thanks for making the autobiography of Haile Selassie I available. It was not very available before you acquired the copyright. It was only in some libraries in universities and so on. So I would like now, since you have given us this overview of your thought in all of these activities, I would now like to come also to the eye as a part of the SOSACRO faculty, as a teacher yourself, and that we maybe now get into a few not only historical lessons as we had them now, but also lectures like, for example, in the SOSACRO summer schools, it was always a big component, for example, how Rastafari teach, and things like Jerusalem schoolroom, especially reasonings. This is also the Rastafari Reasonings project at the University of Vienna. You now, as a teacher in the faculty of the School of Sacrament, Rastafari University, SOSACRO, and you said in the beginning, it is very important for students of Rastafari to learn, especially from the reasonings of Rastafari themselves. What is actually reasoning? When Rastafari emphasized that very much, that it is something very special and significant and different from interviews or discussions or other forms of communication. What is to the eye, from the eye experience, how would you explain what is Rastafari reasonings and the significance about it? Give thanks.
Well, Rastafari reasonings is vital. It goes back historically to the early 1930s, mid-30s, coming into the into 40s, with the groundations taking place in different parts of different parishes across Jamaica, what we call at that time groundations. So what you have in reasonings is not where one individual is now sitting and interviewing somebody and therefore it's skewing words and sentences to basically around what they want to hear. Reasoning is a participatory event whereby collectively we are participating in a concept and discussion around a topic or theme. So here it is, you not only having one person relating, but you having the community or collective involved in what is taking place within the reasoning and reasonment of what is taking place at that point in time, no matter what the topic might be, whether it's about women, whether it's about the rights of our sisters, how they see things within an Abingi order, within whatever social order. But it's about a discussion. It's not a one-way rule, because if it's a one, then it becomes very much subjective rather than objective. And the reasoning, so therefore, will consider to be more a collective thing. Rather, if you interviewing me in terms of there's no participant, there's not, you are showing up and trying to find how you could put my back against a wall, how you could stick me up. But reasoning now, whereby a lot more would be gained collectively, because it is now a lot of participation is taking place within the dialogue of what is taking place within reasoning.
Give thanks. And in that context of Rastafari reasonings, what is often, how it is often described, or what is said that is important, is to edify each other. Is that what you mean also by that?
Yes, because I am learning, you are learning, the other people who are participating in the surrounding is also learning. So yes, so it's a total edification by all, not just one party who might be the person, who might be a person who say, oh yeah, he might be knowledgeable and so on. But at the end of the day, knowledge is coming from all different areas within that circle of the reasoning.
Yes, give thanks. And then in that, using that kind of methodology, as academia would say, now, since the project is Rastafari Reasonings, of which you are a partner at the University of Vienna, so now having the opportunity to reason with a Rastafari elder with so much experience, I deliberately only came to this point now, since we have already covered a lot of ground in this reasoning before. A very basic question, which is of course a very huge question, but again, in that context of reasonings, what comes most importantly to your mind? How would you explain now, since now you explained reasonings and this is the Rastafari Reasonings project, what is Rastafari actually? In maybe again in a nutshell, of course, but most importantly, to the eye, and how would you communicate that, and how you find it important that it is communicated, that the world understands, especially through educational measures and initiatives, to understand, to overstand, as Rastafari would say, what is actually Rastafari?
Well, Rastafari is their majesty in action. Rastafari is I and I. That means it consists of a trinity, a body of trinity. Haile Selassie, the father, Empress Menen, the mother, and I, the children of Rastafari. That is the trinity of Rastafari. So Rastafari, we don't define Rastafari. From my perspective, I don't look at Rastafari in terms of Haile Selassie being God. Because what is God? God is a limitation of Rastafari. God is a limitation of who Haile Selassie is. So we look at Rastafari from a perspective of a people's culture, a people culture coming to this part of the world, the Western Hemisphere, coming from Africa, coming here as Rastafari in the burials of our ancestors. We come in here and we endure on the plantation a lot of pain and peril. And within that is where Rastafari, the essence of Rastafari, was formulated on these plantations in North America, right? Even in what we call among the Buffalo Soldiers. Here it is, the basis of Rastafari was formulated. Because on the plantation, when the Maroons, when after the Spanish had to free the slaves because they were beaten back by the British, and they freed the slaves, and the slaves ran up into the mountains, and some ones define them as runaway slaves or Maroons. In the same way in Suriname, they call them Cimarroons, with the Dutch word for it. So it was, in that dispensation, it was Rastafari, and from a different perspective. It was a Rastafari. Haile Selassie did not make his new visit yet in the power of the Holy Trinity, but you had Rastafari was being germinated in the bowels of our people, because it was struggling, whether it was in North America, whether it was in South and Central America, whether it was in the Caribbean, and among us taking over that whole concept from the Taino people. The Taino people were the people who were some of the people who were found here when so-called Columbus came and said he discovered North America and the Caribbean. These Taino people, we as Rastafari have inherited that, because they were the Rastafari at that time, moving across what we know as the Caribbean today in their canoes. And they were the Rastafari at that time, at that element, right? Going from Guyana to Jamaica, going from Jamaica to Puerto Rico, going from Puerto Rico to St. Croix and St. Thomas and Totola and so on, reaching all further south to Trinidad, going to Venezuela, to Bolivia. These were the Rastafari, and Rastafari at that time. So we know in this dispensation, when people like Howell, when people like Atili Rogers, who was the one who came forward the Holy PB at that time, when you had all those early founders and and practitioners of Rastafari in a really different time. Taki, and so on. All these was early Rastafari people because they were rebelling against a system, colonialism. They were rebelling against the Queen's order and the King's order. And Rastafari is a rebellious movement. When we look at the whole question of within Rastafari, yes, we have the question of methodology. How we create and develop methodology, the research that has been done in terms of event in relation to persons and historical events, right? How we conduct that research from a statistical overview, how we look at it, right? How we look in terms of what are we going to use, the data, how are we going to use it? How is it going to be skewed? Is it going to be skewed in terms of the masses of people, or is it going to be skewed in terms of in favor of the oppressor or the oppressor, right? When we look at historically, it was said, and Rastafari used a lot of mythos within the concept and development of Rastafari, because we would say back in the 20s, people would say, oh yes, Nyabingi. Nyabingi means that the white long pressers. But at the end of the day, Nyabingi comes from the origination of a woman called Nyabingi out of Uganda. And she was one who fought against British colonialism. So when you go and you hear that Haile Selassie met Marcus Garvey and they created the Nyabingi order, that is myth. So we have to be able to pull out the myths, and therefore within that, the myths we pull it out and extract it, how we extract those myths and how we develop that proper methodology to be able to conduct and create a perspective within Rastafari. Give thanks.
Give thanks. And as you have now mentioned, Africa is, of course, very central to all of this, what you just mentioned, and to Rastafari in general. And the research project is called Rastafari Reasonings on Africa in Historical Perspective. Now, maybe you can also speak on this a bit, because especially in the academia, everybody who works on it knows that there is certain resistance from mainstream academia to say, well, Rastafari are not really Africans, or Africans in the West are not really Africans. They are diasporans and so on, which of course has important implications for repatriation as well as reparations. Maybe you can speak on the significance of Africa to Rastafari, or even beyond that, to African people in the West, African people in the Caribbean, and why this is so significant to Rastafari, and to still identify with Africa, despite all criticism that might come from the academia, and maybe so that the academia also, those who are willing, can better understand and overstand this identification of Africans in the West, especially in the context of Rastafari.
Well, I want to start off by saying, I want to quote Malcolm X. Malcolm X said, if you take a cat and put it in an orphan, would it change from becoming a cat? It will still be a cat. So when you take African people and you uproot them from their homeland, right, the ancestral homeland, Africa, which is one of the largest continents we look at, right? So when you look at whether it's coming from south, north, east, west of Africa, and you uproot it basically mainly from the west and central Africa, and so on, some parts of east, but mainly south, West Africa. But you were uprooted and sent here on ships. One of the ships was called Jesus, right? So when we came here, they tried to deculturize us, dehumanize us, make us from Africans and call us Negroes or niggers and all these different words, blacks and all these different things, right? Samoas. But we remain to be African people. We remain coming across that voyage, coming across that great Atlantic voyage, what we call that triangular trade from Africa to the Caribbean to what they call the New World to North America. It was a very important voyage because we left a lot of our relatives behind. We left a lot of our relatives behind. We were uprooted and was put on ships naked, chained. Hence the reason we say that we were prisoners of war, because we were captured. We did not voluntarily came on these ships to come and work on the plantations, to grow sugar cane and tobacco and cotton. We were forcibly removed. So if you came left one place as an African, and now you are transplanted into other places here in North America, on the continent of North America, Central America, the Caribbean, and so on. Do we change our ethnicity? Do we change who we are as a people? We are still Africans. We are still Africans. We are the only people that they try to change us from who we are because they deculturize us, they take away our spirituality, they take away our humanity. They try to beat it out of us, right? Many of our African brothers and sisters, many of our ancestors, rather than come to the Western Hemisphere, they decided to throw themselves overboard and commit suicide to the unknown. So we were Africans, and we would always remain Africans. That is why you had people were fighting for African liberation in the 1800s, whether in North America, South America, Central America, the Caribbean, and so on, who were prepared to walk, to go home. What was home? Home was Africa. Home was Africa to them, because we never forgot where we came from deep down in our psyche. We never forgot that we were African people. And the importance of Africa lay strong within our psyche, because we knew that one day we as African people went to liberate ourselves from mental slavery. We knew for a fact that Africa cannot be free until all African people, whether in North America, South America, Central America, Africa, etc., until all of Africa is free and liberated, we as Africans, wherever we are, will not be free and liberated. It is very important. Their Majesty said it. Until the color of a man's skin is of no more significant than the color of his eyes, there will be war. He said it. So it's real that we understand that we can never change as African people from being who we are. We left Africa as Africans and we came to the West, and we will remain Africans. And we will fight until all the strength in us for the liberation of Africa and African people. And all of us don't have to return, because here is for us, for some, whether you're in North America, whether you're in South and Central America, whether the Caribbean, this is now a new home. But for the majority, for some, we must return to what we call our motherland, our ancestral land. Is very central. And now we are taken back to Africa now. Rastafari now is returning to Africa, coming from where? The bowels of the slave trade, from the Caribbean, from Jamaica per se, right? Where this was germinated among unlettered people in the ghettos of Jamaica, right? Whereby ones and ones were able to come together in Trenchtown, in Bacawall, in St. Thomas parishes, and so on. And the concept of Rastafari will come together. That is why Lennon Howell felt the brunt of the colonial master. in the 1930s, because after being deported from the US and returning to Jamaica, and he having the concept of not that other people didn't understand and was not preaching about Rastafari, but he saw the importance not only of Rastafari as a concept in terms of being prophet or priest or king, but he saw Haile Selassie as is. He is. So it's not about whether Haile Selassie is king. Yeah, because as Sam Brown told me, one of my special elders said to me, he said, if you see him as king, you're going to get king blessing. If you see him as priest, if you see him as prophet, you're going to get prophet blessings. If you see him as the I and I, the eternal one, you will, that is supreme. So there's no definition for Haile Selassie because we limit Haile Selassie. Some people say, oh, Haile Selassie is up in the sky. Where they pointed to, I don't know. Probably in relation to what they may call heaven. But Haile Selassie doesn't fly on wings. We don't look in terms of how we look in terms of how Christians pray and Muslims pray and try to plead with some supreme force or supreme being or some infinite thing. No, Rastafari is practical. We understand Mother Nature. We understand Mama Nature. We understand the thunder, the lightning, and as Marcus Garvey said, look for me in the storm, look for me in the whirlwind. We understand that all these concepts, whether it was Shango, whether it was the Orisha, because our whole cosmology, it came from down the Nile Valley. Our origination coming out of Nubia, coming out of Azania, coming out of or what we know as old Ethiopia, coming out of Somalia, out of Punt. This is where the cosmology of Rastafari originated. Here it is now that we have come and coined and created here in the West, in a little island in Jamaica, spreading throughout the Caribbean, our ideology, a theology, a concept, a way of life, a culture, strong culture now. That wherever you go, you hear people using that beat. Some call it reggae, but it's coming out of the Nyabingi order. And it has spread all over the world. So we now could see that the Rastafari has now come and germinated in the West and in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, and now going out now to develop, return to Africa. Because now we see in Azania, South Africa, now we see in Malawi. Just 2 years ago, you had a Rastafari brethren running for election in Malawi as for president. You see in Tanzania, you see in all Somalia, you see in Uganda, you see in different Timbuktu, in Congo, right? Zimbabwe. You see the spread of Rastafari in leaps and bounds. So here it is. We came as prisoners of war, and we now have germinated an ideology, a theology, a way of life that is now going forward to Rastafari. And those who are returning as returnees, those who are repatriating overseas and returning to the land of our forefathers, which awaits us today. This is the power of Rastafari. This is the power of the African spirit that never left us and will remain with us, because we as African people did not change because we came over the Middle Passage from coming from African to Negroes to Blacks. We always will remain Africans, and we always will fight for Africa, because Africa is our ancestral motherland. So even though you take on this new home as the Caribbean or North America and so on, our ancestral land lies deep in our spirit. Here we are.
Give thanks. Give thanks. And that identification with Rastafari, of Rastafari with Africa that you just elaborated. In the last reasoning with the eye on the Sosakro platform, you mentioned, and you also mentioned it in a reasoning with me, that actually the port of Spain, Rastafari in Trinidad called it Port of Africa, and in Ras Sekou Tafari wrote about that the first store you actually had was an Ital food store, and it was called Forward Home.
Yes. Yes.
So that
Yes. Yes. One of the first things I had a business called it was a health food store and a restaurant, and we had that in what we call the area of Laventil area, east, in East Port of Spain, and that is an area where had a lot of that in those days, had a lot of Rastafari brethren and sistren, and those brethren and sistren who would gravitate to buying Rastafari Speaks and so on. So Forward Home is the concept of returning home, the concept of returning to Africa, because Africa is, it always remain in our mind that we're going to return home at some point in time, and how we keep it alive in the minds of our people. That, so when one was, Rastafari, we're not living in Port of Spain, because that is Spain, we're not in Spain, this is Port of Africa. So my brother Akel, who was a sociologist, we all studied together, as students, undergraduate, and so on, and he said, we're not living in Port of Spain, we live in Port of Africa. And then you had in different parts of Trinidad, you had like places like Mova and so on, and they were called certain parts Africa, Little Africa, and so on, because the consciousness was there in terms of always being able to identify Africa as a homeland. So even though they were away from Africa, we saw the importance of relating the terms and labels and names and to the spaces where we were. Give thanks.
Yes, I give thanks. And so since Africa has been so central to Rastafari, and as you mentioned also before, Rastafari is now on the continent and having more and more influence on the continent, the African continent itself also. And the whole idea was always this forward home idea. So what do you think has Rastafari already contributed, or what does Rastafari contribute to African development, or how the African continent is developing, is going into the future, however we want to call it or frame it, but what is actually Rastafari contributing to Africa, and is actually basically maybe even an asset or an importance that Rastafari can and has been or is contributing to Africa, African development, African future?
Well, very, very, very crucial. When Douglas Mack and Mortimer Planner and a few others went on the first journey to Africa in 1961, fact-finding mission from Jamaica, and they had a few other brethren and so on from other parts of the Caribbean, the Pipers and so on. When they went to the Caribbean, to Africa, one of the things, if you notice in From Babylon to Rastafari, written by Douglas Mack, he mentioned that when he reached Kenya, although the brethren and sisters in Jamaica had never been to Kenya, the tabernacle that was built in Africa, in Jamaica, was mentally, it was the same as what was there in Kenya. They had the brethren and sisters in Kenya, they didn't call themselves Rastafari, but basically it was the same concept that was taking place in Jamaica in the 1930s and 1940s. So we look at it and we see that there was similarities, a lot of similarities was taking place. Rastafari as a people, Marcus Garvey said, when those who going home to Africa, he don't want the dregs. If you are no good here, you will be no good there. So therefore, those who are coming and we want to return to Africa, they must prepare in all different forms. So when we return as to the homeland, to build, we're going to build. We're going to build because, as the Majesty say, Africa awaits its creators. So if Africa awaits its creators, when we are going there, the Majesty said in 1961, when on the trip, when they went to Ethiopia, the Majesty made them stay in Ethiopia for weeks, so they could analyze and observe the terrain, the geographical space, so they could know if are you ready? Are you you want to come home? That is what is facing you here. You have to come with skills. You have to be equipped. You have to come with professional readiness. So we want, when you preparing to go to Africa, we want accountants, we want doctors, we want neurosurgeons, we want people who are versed as carpenters and masons. We want people who are actuaries in the actuary science. We want doctors and lawyers. We want plumbers. We want seamstresses and so on. All these people must come together, equipped. So if you know you want to return to Africa, you must start preparing, because we don't want people coming to Africa who are not ready to build at Africa to be the richest and strongest continent ever. China in 1949 had a revolution. 1949, Mao Zedong led the people of China in the Long March to a revolution in 1949. Now, 73 years later, China, right? When I was a student studying undergrad, I remember China was a third world country in 1977, 1976, 75. China was a colony. It was still not a colony, but a third world country, so-called third world country. What they define as a third world country. Now China is a superpower, producing, supplying, right? Anything you could look for, food, military equipment, etc., etc. China can. Why can Africa not be the same? China specialized in what we're taking, re-engineering, right? We as Caribbean people, we as African people in the West, if we are preparing to go to Africa, we have to go equipped. We have to go to be at service to the people of Africa, to our motherland and to our ancestors. That is what we need to do to be ready. We have to be Africa ready then. We have to be Africa ready. We have to be ready to take on the mantle to rebuild Africa brick by brick. We need to go to Africa to tell the people what to do who have been there for the last 4,000-5,000 years and more. We can't go to tell them and dictate to them what we must do, but we must go with humility to help to build Africa to be one of the strongest continents ever, to surpass Songhai, to surpass Azania, to surpass Kemet. We must be able to go to Africa to build it as one of the strongest foundation empires ever. Because we must know that just where we stay here in North America is fast decaying. The United Snakes, the United States of Apartheid is fast decaying and is moribund. So we are going to Africa to rebuild Africa, but brick by brick, with our African brothers and sisters and cousins who were there and who left there. And some of them was some of those wicked chiefs who sold us out. We are going back to show our gratitude, not for them, but to our African ancestors, our progressive ancestors, the Shakas, the Hannibal, the Thomas Sankara, Amilcar Cabral, Winnie Mandela, we are going to show how we respect our African ancestors, and we want to go home so we can build Africa brick by brick, stone by stone. So we need the plumbers, we need the carpenters, we need the engineers in all different capacity, whether it's a civil engineer or electrical engineer or structural engineer, construction engineer, whether it's a seamstress, whether it's an accountant, whether it's a librarian, a trubarian, whatever you come in with, a philosopher, a historian, a lecturer, a teacher, we need you. But you must be equipped, because we don't want the dregs. Let the dregs. We don't want nobody coming to beg for handouts. You come in to build and create employment, create business. So when you see long ago when we talk about the Chinese, it's used to say that the Chinese man, he can have a Chinaman chance. No, you can't say that about China and Chinese people, because the Chinese now, it has created what you call superpower. And hence the reason America is shaking, because America cannot see they controlled the world in terms of world hegemony anymore. There's no, when you had the Soviet Union, no Russia, and so on. Now you have the Chinese man, who just 1949, India became independent 2 years before. And before the Mao Zedong led the Chinese people to this great revolution. And you can't tell me that we as African people, all over the world, all over the diaspora, from Brazil to North America, to South America, to Central America, to the Caribbean, to Europe, that we cannot go and build Africa to be an example of the world. We can. And the Majesty has set that black print for us. Give thanks.
Give thanks, Ras Sekou. And apart from these technical aspects, Rastafari elders sometimes emphasize that in terms what academia would call political philosophy, or so, what Rastafari contributed towards that, to reaching there, was, for example, in the minds also, for example, Pan-Africanism. How do you see that? We have now more and more even young Rasta in different African countries who run for president, and usually they have on their platform some kind of Pan-Africanism involved and so on. How do you see it when it comes to the minds?
Well, first and foremost, we must understand that Rastafari is a Pan-African concept. But Rastafari is the concept that was laid out in 1901, 1900 by Sylvester Williams, who coined the word Pan-Africanism, right? So, and you know, Sylvester Williams, who was born in Trinidad, he was a lawyer living in England, and he called the first Pan-African conference in 1900. And Rastafari fits in within the ambit of Pan-Africanism, because we see the importance that Africa as our main homeland. Africa being our homeland, the whole question of using African tools and African concepts and African ideology to rebuild Africa, wherever we are, right? So when we say that we don't want to take part in the politics of the West, but it's important that as we go forward, as we write this writ of Rastafari, we understand that Rastafari has a Pan-African concept, a Pan-African ideology, that we must utilize that concept, the teachings of Kwame Nkrumah Osajifo. We must utilize the teaching of Julius Nyerere. We must utilize the teachings of Amilcar Cabral, Patrice Lumumba, Winnie Mandela. We must utilize the teaching of Thomas Sankara. All these are great Pan-African leaders. Their Majesty Haile Selassie I. He gave them, in the struggle for apartheid, against apartheid in South Africa, Zania, Their Majesty was training members of the ANC and PAC in Ethiopia in guerrilla warfare. Who gave Nelson Mandela his first revolver? It was the High Majesty Haile Selassie I. He knew the importance of struggle. He knew the importance of struggle by any means necessary to reclaim Azania, South Africa, from Buta, and all those who control, and Ian Smith, who at the time had controlled, we now know as Zimbabwe, who was called Rhodesia. When Harold Wilson, back in 1963-64, thereabout, he said, when they said, are you going to attack Ian Smith? He said, not against my own kith and kin, because that is European power, that is European politics, that is what we call Europeanism. So what we must embed and create and hold on to is the concept of Pan-Africanism, the spirit of Pan-Africanism. So when you touch one African in any part of the world, you touch an African in any other part of the world. He or she feels it. And that is the concept of Pan-Africanism. If you touch one, you touch all. Until all Africa is free. Until all Africa is free and liberated under Pan-Africanism. So one united Africa, the 52 states, 53 states, and now they expanded to the 6th region, which includes the Caribbean and South and Central America. So here it is, we continue from the Organization of African Unity to the African Union now. So we hold on to the concept of Pan-Africanism. It is the ideology of all Africans that we must go forward and build one strong Africa, one strong army, one strong government. We may not see it in our lifetime. We may not see it in our lifetime. I may not experience it in my lifetime, but generations to come will experience it. Where African leaders, the young and upcoming ones, will decide and say, we don't have, like how you have a United States, so-called of America. Then we will have a United States of Africa, where Botswana will have its president, but they all will sit on a council together to run Africa. So those where you are strong in whatever, so if Azania is strong in diamonds, if it's strong in gold production, therefore that we will import gold and silver and diamond from South Africa, from Azania, South Africa. If Ethiopia is strong, in terms of electrical, we creating hydrogenic power and so on, then we who is strong in agriculture. So Africa does not really need to import from European countries. We have everything. We have oil. We have gas. We have everything that is there. Haile Selassie said it. Kwame Nkrumah Sachifo said it. He said, we have everything under our feet, but who benefits from it? Who benefits from it? Not the Africans, masses of people, but the Europeans. We take our cocoa and sends it to Britain, sends it to Germany, right? To be processed, and then it's sent back to us in Africa and the Caribbean, and it's now called Milo, Ovaltine, or whatever, and we pay high prices. You go to England, you go to France, you go to Holland, and you could get bananas. You could buy bananas in these places cheaper than you would buy for Chiquito bananas coming from South and Central America, that you would pay for bananas coming out of the Caribbean. Why it is? Because of the concept of neocolonialism still reigns today. So the whole structure, we have to hold on to Pan-Africanism. It is a will. It is a will as a Rastafari. So Rastafari in itself is a Pan-African concept. Give thanks.
Give thanks. And I give thanks to Ras Sekou for these very important and very interesting reasonings with from a Rastafari elder, the I self is great for, I think, all of us here in this Zoom to have this opportunity to learn from all these reasonings. I would therefore now like to open the floor for questions. And I would like to start with the first question now also as just a participant in this Zoom. You have already touched on it when you said Africa should be an example for the world. But still, I would like to ask, since you have now explained how Central Africa to Rastafari is, was it surprising to you when suddenly people from all over the world, Europeans, European Americans, Asians, started to become interested in Rastafari and wanted to learn from Rastafari, to see the world through these perspectives also that Rastafari has taught? Was that surprising to you, or how did you experience that development, and what would you say to that?
No, it wasn't surprising to me, because when you understand dialectics, when you understand the concept of dialectics, you'll understand that, there's always contradictions. And therefore, for many years, we looked African people transported to the West, and even those who remained in Africa that was colonialized by Europeanism, we looked to what you call a Michelangelo's portrait of so-called Jesus. I don't know if Jesus even existed in reality, but we looked to that concept. So when you have unlettered people who came as slaves, as prisoners of war, coming from as way back to what they call the dark continent in those days, right? Because that was the name attributed to Africa. And we were transplanted into the Western region, into the Caribbean. Here it is. These people now have created a masterpiece coming out in the heights of colonialism in the 1930s and 1920s. A liberty, a strong liberty, a natural liberty, organic liberty called Rastafari. So when their Majesty became an Empress Menenwi was coronated in 1930, and they were fighting because you had what you would call the influence of people like George Padmore, who, as a Pan-Africanist, he was a strong influence on Lennon Howell, right, in the 20s. And it is still, there's research shown that Lennon Howell and George Padmore, even when he was in a mental asylum in Bellevue and in a prison, they were in correspondence. So here it is, you have when somebody like Lennon Howell was selling a picture of their Majesty, right? And as a portrait, selling it to raise money to build his organization, right? Over years, the whole concept of Rastafari being developed, from on Pinnacle Hill, right? In the first commune among I and I. The first commune, collective community, a strong community being built. It's socially independent, economically independent, right? Agriculture being one of its strong points. Growing herb, growing food that could even supply the prison system at the height of World War II. So here it is. Leonard Howell, also known as the Gong, right? He now was able to build that community into a strong community until it was burned down around 1954, and so on, 1954, 1955. So when somebody like Bob Marley, who took on the name and took that name and called his organization the Tough Gong, and he became one of the most revered and well-known entertainers around the world, talking about Rastafari, singing what they call reggae music, right? Which is a heartbeat coming out of the heartbeat now being the order. Spreading all over the world. One of the first ambassadors and Bob Marley has since left us. His music still lives on among the hearts of people. So here it is. People hearing him, people talking about their Majesty Haile Selassie as king, as God, concept. Here it is. We were reckoning over the years. We were willing to worship in a Michelangelo's portrait. So it does not surprise me because dialectics will tell you that sooner or later, those who were down will come up. So the concept of Rastafari will become well known across the globe because it is an organic phenomenon. It is organic. So of course they want to know what triggers these little people coming out of the backyard of Kingston, out of backyard. What triggers these people? What made these people tick? So it didn't surprise me. And I'm glad that people from all over the world, white people, Indian people, and so on, they could look at Rastafari and embrace it. Because for years, we've been embracing their so-called God. Or I don't know what God means or what God is. Because I just embrace Haile Selassie the first. Give thanks.
Give thanks, Ras Sekou. I see now, since the floor is open, Bongo Wisely has raised his hand. Of course, a long companion of Ras Sekou. Please come forward, Bongo Wisely. Give thanks for joining.
Yes, give thanks, Rastafari. As we say, glory to word, glory to sound, glory be to the powers of the living eye, Kedamawi, Haile Selassie, and Empress Menen. Perfect balance. Give thanks, Brother Sekou. Yeah, man.
Yes, sir.
For
Yes,
the
sir.
presentation, you know, Rastafari.
Yes, sir. Give thanks, my brethren.
Yes, I just to, you know, well, for the sake of reasoning, for the sake of dialogue, you know, the I made mention that His Divine Majesty, I would consider him as being higher than God, because if we consider him to be God, as though we would be like we limiting him or limiting the whole thing. But then the word said, in the beginning was the word, and the word was God, meaning the word of truth, the word of righteousness, the word of upfulness was God, you know? So my question was, how would you define God? Who or what? But then I heard a while ago you say, as though you don't even know. You know, so that I still put in the question, you know. So since you say His Majesty, you would consider him to be higher than God. Who or what would you consider to be God?
Well, I would say, if the question is finished, I would say, what is God? If I look in terms of the books that they have given to us to read, it's a, ye are gods. Unto the word, ye are God. That means we all are God in some way, whether you might be a child God, a mother God, a father God. But in terms of to say God, and I'm looking up in the sky for some infinite being, which I label as God, therefore we're looking at the pale man concept of God. Because we, as African people, we looked at the concept of nature, Mother Nature. We look at the concept of the sun, the moon, the stars, the rivers. We look in terms of the seas, the thunder, lightning, the breeze. God, we say, look for me in the whirlwind. Look for me in the storm. So we limit their majesty when we say, in my mind, we limit their majesty when we look and compare their majesty to God, and what they define as God, in my mind. Because their concept of God is some people may say God is Jesus, right? Who they've defined as the Roman Catholic Church. They ordained a white concept which we still have in our homes in the South here, North America, which we still have in our homes, or some of the younger ones still have in their homes here in the Caribbean, Michelangelo's portrait, right? So we look at Haile Selassie. We don't give him wings, because it's beyond wings. We don't put him up in the sky, because it's beyond the sky. The planes goes up in the sky, satellites goes up into the sky, and all those things. So when we look at how they look at the concept of God coming from the Latin perspective, coming from the perspective of what they will call, go back into the Bible, and the Bible said, let us make man in our own image and likeness. Let us. So it tells me, even from their concept, from the biblical perspective, there were reasoning taking place. Reasoning what we're doing now. Reasoning was taking place according to that concept, that there was a concept of reasoning between more than one party. For them to say, let us make man in our own image and likeness. So let us means that there was a reasoning between parties. And when we look at the reality, the scientific reality, we see that in order to create any being or anything, whether it's an animal, whether it's a tree, even the cannabis tree have its male and the female parts. So it takes two concepts, the mother and the father. The mother and the father was reasoning according to the concept for what I'm reading and what I'm hearing in my mind. And they came together and they said, let us make man in our own image and likeness. So therefore, if you call that concept, according to it, go back to 6,000 years ago, when the humanity goes back and the development of man, right, going back to Dinkidish, goes forward to 3-point-something million years old, and more concepts and more beings and androids may be found later on to show that we probably even go beyond that, 3-point-something million years old. So the concept of goes 6,000 years old, which is the history of the European, the history of the pale man, that says, let us make man in our own image and likeness. Not the concept of what has happening around the Nile Valley civilization, where the cosmology of man originated, developed over time, from within that, from east all the way to south, right? The Queen of Sheba, what we call the Queen of Sheba. Sheba was a province. Sheba was a province in Ethiopia. It was a province near to Yemen, what we now know as Yemen or North and South Yemen. So we look at where the Queen of Sheba, which we know as Makeda, she ruled from as far as Yemen all the way to Tanzania, right? And therefore, we know for a fact that their civilization erupted and was developed within those regions. From Nubia, the people who were darker and darker, and the concept they had in those regions was that you and I was the supreme being. When the king ruled, he ruled in the concept of the living high. What we, the Rastafari, our elders, they call what some call God, basing it on European beliefs and concepts. But it goes beyond that, because Rastafari is not limited. We don't limited Rastafari how we will say, oh yeah, my train is playing and it's Haile Selassie give you this, and we go and pray to try to bribe, and we pray for this and we pray for that. No, it's bigger than that. The concept of Rastafari goes beyond what we can see and what we cannot see. And is that we're still learning every day about the concept of Mama Nature as we develop within the irides of Rastafari. So I would not be able to say, well, you know, God per se, because I don't know what God is, but I know who Haile Selassie is. And I know Haile Selassie when I look at the representation and the power of the Trinity itself tells me that the powers of I and I, they continue to dwell among I and I within our ancestral realm. Give thanks.
Give thanks. I see Ras Elijah has his hand raised. Give thanks for joining.
Give thanks. Give thanks for the reasoning and give thanks for the opportunity to share. You know, it's interesting in multiple ways. I would say that there's a lot to be said of, you know, respect, you know, for the elders and for, you know, those listening. And at the same place, as Ras Sekou speaks on Rastafari, he's representing a particular train of thought. And that train of thought is one that represents generation, locality, and so on. And, you know, some of these thoughts include things that we see as common issues within the movement. And that includes the vision and the perspective of Christianity and whether or not you're going to always use a European reference of doing so. And when we look at things of understanding the cross and the crown and how so many seem to have a conflict between the essence and the teachings and the verbalization of the relationship of carrying the cross and in order to carry the crown, that there is an interesting element in which I'm obligated to speak on. There's many things in which even the approach of this quote unquote reasoning is something in which is almost based in a certain level of trying to explain to academia, including certain questions and ways of looking at things that are based on a white man's way of thinking. That the very nature of how to look representable to them, to be accepted by them, to be able to, and what we are about is to destroy the systems of colonialization. And some of these systems are about silencing the way that they do things is the problem. And it was something which Ras Sekou touched on earlier, which I appreciated, which we are a resistance movement to colonialization. That the divine calling that we have through His Majesty, through the scriptures, through life, through the struggle, through good over evil and justice, that these things here are an element in which makes it so that our resistance to the system is pivotal. And that system includes the way that we are forced to look and then put ourselves into categories, or to then make a situation in which we want to compare ourselves to other nations. The very nature of looking and making classes of Africans that are acceptable or wanted in Africa, when we are here to make sure that the hungry are fed and the naked are clothed and the elderly are protected. And what about the retarded ones? What about like reparation in this time in a futuristic manner? We have to look at the viability and the actuality of principles and strategies that can be used for Africans by Africans, realizing that other nations have it intrinsically against it, that for us to succeed, that it is against their overall agenda. And therefore the systems that they use cannot be the ones in which we compare ourselves to. And that includes, in a sense, the names of Africans. You know, I am reminded of the term in Acts 13 of niggas, explaining that niggas is a term that was older than all these Europeans. And this term means Egyptian Christians. So the very nature of watching how we want to say, now we're not black, we're not niggas, we're not Negroes, we're not, but we are this, we're Africans. Like the future of Africa is to realize we are everything, just like God is everything, just like that which you see all came from the invisible. They're trying to even ask Ras Sekou to explain Rastafari. I appreciate it how they say you can't explain the Most High. You know, when you try to explain it, you're doing that European thing again of putting God in a box. And there's a certain energy of watching that Rastafari here is a living spirit which is growing. And there are ideas that are coming out now that are going to be much more, not much more, because again, that's that trick, that trying to rank. And it's an intrinsic thing. People do it all the time with even His Majesty, of trying to say, you know, he is the 225th, you know, descendant of King Solomon. If people don't believe in the Bible, or they've been hurt by religion, and they've been entrenched with a reaction, which is what, you know, is this nature of Black political science at rest when we are with our slave masters. The very simplicity of the way that we often accept ones calling us slaves at any point. We have never been slaves. We are Africans that were put in bondage, prisoners of war, like Ras Sekou said. That is reality. But to have anybody refer to us as slaves, this is that same going back into this, you are calling us less than the Almighty's children and embodiment in His likeness and image. And the very moment we accept certain types of viewpoints of ourselves in a limiting capacity. And Ras Sekou talked about how, you know, God is unlimited, or the Most High is unlimited. I will tell you, Selassie is unlimited. So the very nature of Jah in everything can be seen in a scientific format. And we have to explain it through mathematics and biology to them, then so be it. But there is a nature, just like Ethiopia is in all of our biology, and that humanity will always be a legacy of Ethiopia. So it is that man walks with Ethiopia in them, all nations. So there's a reason why all nations shall come to the same point eventually. And the way that we as Rastafari have a nature of not trying and push His Majesty's being the Almighty, because of this confusion that ones have put around God, or should I say, trying to say the God, you know? But honestly, the very nature of realizing that the invisible is what creates visible, and therefore the relationship of His Majesty to the invisible, or should we say the heavens, that we are seeing that, you know, that to say He's not up there is to say and fall into the same game. If God is everywhere, if His Majesty is always and everywhere in all things, we have to come to a grips of understanding that we have to accept, like in Jamaica, who thought God would come out the sky? But that's where He came out of, right out the clouds, you know? I've seen Him with wings. We've seen Him fly all over the world, you know, and that's reality. So if we've seen it already here on earth, why wouldn't it be again and again in all different realms? So there's a certain level of just ways Rastafari will grow in its own perspective to try and share things, to show that His Majesty is right, and that the very nature of our African peoples loving themselves, their culture, is allowing us to love others and their culture, and likewise, and vice versa. So the very nature of us knowing ourselves 100% as Africans, and not ever getting this European concept into thinking that we have to adapt into this. They are wrong. Their systems don't make sense. And therefore trying to play games with them, you know. And I taught last week in a college, Black University, JSCU, a little bit about the origin of Ethiopia in the Bible and in science. And it's something with the very nature of trust, it's a big issue. You know, speaking honestly, even on this platform where it may be seen by other people on YouTube, and who, you know, it's one of those things that there is a certain nature of rage. There's a certain importance of speaking about things that are Black for Black, as Black, and as what Africa must do. Because it's something where it's not just what we're bringing to Africa, but what Africa is bringing to us. And the reality that if somebody who's an elder who can't walk wants to go back to home, they have that right to repatriate. That everybody who is Black should have the right to repatriate. And then the thinking of trying to class ones and ones and saying you are worthy and you are not. You know, this is the same type of thing of leaving out the power of free salvation. Now we have an opportunity and a mission to tell Africa, you need healthcare for all. How can you want us to come home, but you can't take care of the sick? We have an obligation to push Africa in every way it can to do what it can for herself and us. That is our and her obligation as one. Too long we are waiting on Europeans for validation and accreditation. And it's one of those things where Africa has to create brand new systems of thinking that have not even got titles yet. We need to find ways of expressing our spirituality in an Ethiopian manner. And that way we can just get rid of this Roman oppression 100% and carry the cross and the crown together. And that's all. God bless you all and give thanks again. Ras Sekou, it's always an honor to hear you.
Give thanks, my brethren. Give thanks. Always good, Elijah. Always good.
My Lord.
Yes, give thanks. The floor is still open. We are now a bit over 2 hours. We did not want to extend it too far over 2 hours, but this is Rastafari Reasoning in Progress. If ones would still like to contribute, I think we still have a few minutes. I see, for example, Ras Benaya from Kenya, also on the platform. Ras Sekou mentioned before that the wise mind will be also translated into Swahili and will then also be distributed in East Africa. We have just reasoned about the wise mind a few, I think, weeks ago, I and Ras Benaya, and so I'm sure that is a very welcome information for the item over there in East Africa. I see Ras Julio as well. I see students from the Sosakro Summer School, from the Rastafari community. I see also Rastafari scholars online. As I said, the floor is open. Everybody is more than welcome to contribute to this reasoning, if it be in terms of reasoning or questions or whatever ones are interested in. There we would still have a few minutes, otherwise we would then now wrap up this reasoning since we are already over 2 hours. Yes, give thanks. So it seems like the reasoning, Ras Sekou, was very clear, so nobody has any more open questions, but please, Ras Sekou, go forward to have any kind of closing statement you would like to leave this aggregation of ones interested in the reasoning with. Give thanks.
Yes, give thanks again for being here and on this platform. And really welcome the reasoning and concepts and what questions and statements by Bongo Wisely, also concept and ideas thrown out by my brethren, Isaiah. Yes, I think it's very, at this point in time, very, very important that we now start within, not only in academia, but within the concept of Rastafari, the foundation of Rastafari, to rewrite the rect of Rastafari. We need to take that call again, as I pointed out and I said before, the call of Mortimer Planner to for a whole new social system, to a whole new view, a new faculty of interpretation as defined by Mortimer Planner, one of our founding and one of our leaders, one of the brethren who went to Ethiopia in 1961. We have to start looking at the concepts, the role of women, and women have to define that role for themselves within the confines of Rastafari, within the overall view of the perspective of the High Majesty and Empress Menen. So we as men can't write that writ for them. They have to define those definitions of how the role of the Rastafari woman will be playing in this century, the 21st century, as we go forward. So these are the things. We have a lot of work to be done, and much work within I order, as Rastafari brethren and sisters. And none of us is more superior than the other, because we all are students and learning at the foot of the High Majesty Haile Selassie I. So I think that it was very much important that we see the role more, stronger role of our youth, stronger role of our women within this liberty. And we, women, being the ones who are the first teachers of the youth, first teachers of our nation, is very much important that we see more women coming forward and, you know, really addressing and trying to hammer home and create what we will call that concept within Rastafari, so I could build a stronger and stronger nation. And there's no limitation within Rastafari. There's no limitation. There's no barriers to stop Rastafari. None. Rastafari is limitless. Yes, we give thanks.
Give thanks, Ras Sekou. As I had now the closing statement and you had the opening prayer, and as the I and Bongo Wisely are the two elders on this platform, maybe we can ask the I, Bongo Wisely, to seal up this reasoning with Ras Sekou and with all of the item with a prayer at this moment, if possible for the I right now.
Yes, I give thanks, no problem. Yeah, man, always my pleasure, you know. Rastafari. Yes, give thanks. We say glory to word, glory to sound, glory be to the powers of the living I, Kadamawi, Haile Selassie, and Empress Menen. And I was glad when I said unto I and I, come let us yard up into the house of the living I, Haile Selassie first. And I foot must stand within the gates of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is built as a city that is compact together, whether the tribes go up unto the testimonies of Ethiopia. To give youngs and eyes unto the name of the living I, Rastafari. There are set thrones of judgment, the throne of the house of great David. And I pray for the love of Ethiopia, and I must prosper that love his majesty. Love be within I walls and prosperity within I palaces. For I brethren and companions sake, and I will now say love be within the I and the I. Because of the house of the living I, Hilai, Selassie, Rastafari, and I will now seek the I good. Hilai,
Haile Selassie the first and Empress Menen as well.
We do give thanks for this moment. We do give thanks for the words of wise men that has been shared amongst I and I at this hour. We do pray, Almighty I, that all of I and I who are listening patiently, that the I word would find root in I and I heart, and that it would grow and multiply and bring forth fruits in abundance. We do give thanks for the works of Brother Sekou over the years, Almighty I. Continue to strengthen him and give him the guidance, the knowledge, the wise mind, and the understanding that he would continue along this journey. We do give thanks for this moment. We do give thanks for everything that is good. Now that we are about to come to a close of this reasoning, we do pray that the I would endow I and I with the wise mind, knowledge, and understanding so that we could continue to serve the I in gladness of heart. Give thanks for each and every one present. Give thanks for health. Give thanks for life. Hilai, Selassie, Rastafari. And may these words of I and I mouth and the meditations of I and I heart ever be humble and acceptable in thy sight, I strength and I redeemer, the I who long live and reign forever and ever. Hilai,
Rastafari.
Perfect love.
Aye. Give thanks.
Yes, I give thanks. Give thanks for the item. And as we close this reasoning with these full words of the item and reasoning, give thanks and praise for all who participate in this space today. Give thanks and praise. We would like to remind everyone again, please check out Frontline distribution online. The abundance of publications that Ras Sekou has provided for the Rastafari community, and to support Rastafari-owned business with that is supplying this wise mind onto the community. We give thanks for all participation, full participation at this point. And we hope to see everyone for our next reasoning in this series of Rastafari Reasonings, the Rastafari Reasonings project at the University of Vienna, Austria, Department of African Studies, in cooperation with the School of Sacrament, Rastafari University, So Sacro, to bring more Rastafari education to the nations. We do give thanks for full participation, and we see next time. As the elder said, give thanks and praise. Rastafari.
Yes, sir. I give thanks, Dominik.
Give thanks.